The Paul Leslie Hour, helping people tell their stories. And now, your host, Paul Leslie.
Hey, it's me. Welcome to the Paul Leslie Hour. On this episode, we're joined by a trumpeter, Jon-Erik Kellso. This musician is a concert and recording artist. He's the leader of the band The Irregulars, a member of Vince Giordano's Nighthawks. He's worked with many artists, and it's our great pleasure to have him here. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Paul. It's my pleasure.
Well, I think most stories are best from the beginning. Tell the listeners where you're from and a little bit about what life was like growing up.
Oh, okay. I grew up in a city called Allen Park in Michigan, which is a suburb of Detroit, and started playing the trumpet at age 10. I asked my parents if I could play the trumpet in the school band, and my dad said, "Oh yeah, I used to play the trumpet." And so he dug out his old horn, and he was my first teacher, and I took to it right away. I couldn't wait to get adept at the trumpet. Around the same time, I was discovering my parents' old record collection. They had a swing era 78 records and some LPs and stuff like that. And unlike most kids, I wasn't rebelling against that. I actually loved their taste in music and loved their old records. So I kind of got interested in jazz and trumpet at the same time at age 10, which is a bit weird considering this was the 70s. And so, and then I was lucky enough to make friends with another guy that was my same age who was similarly interested in that music. His name was Mike Karub, and he's a bass player, cello player who still lives in Michigan. And we actually formed a jazz band while we were still in elementary school. And we used some ringers from the junior high band. And his dad was the junior high band instructor. And he sort of helped us a little bit by steering us towards figuring out how to buy arrangements for the group and stuff like that. And then we actually got a steady gig when we were in junior high playing at this place called Greenfield Village, which is in Dearborn, Michigan, and that's part of the Henry Ford Museum. And it's kind of like a trip back in time park. And my buddy, Mike Karub, had the good idea to just tell them that they needed to have a traditional jazz band in their park, in the gazebo there. And it wasn't something they advertised for, but he was kind of entrepreneurial in that regard and just sort of visionary. And they said, that's a great idea. Why don't you come in and audition for us? And so we did. And we ended up playing 2 summers there, 6 days a week, 5 hours a day. That was a great way to get some chops and learn some songs. That kind of covers a little bit of my early days. I was also studying classically at the same time as trying to learn how to play jazz, and I played in a group called the International Youth Symphony and also the Michigan Youth Symphony in the junior high and then high school. So I kind of had a little bit of both ends and some real good helps from some great teachers and who were encouraging me to get out there and play in as many different settings as I could.
Can you tell us a few of the recordings that made the biggest impression on you?
Oh, sure. You're talking about in my early days, like?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my dad his trumpet hero was Harry James and also Bunny Berrigan. My dad I was listening to some of his 78s, as I said, and there was one that he had called Strictly Instrumental that I loved of Harry James. And then he introduced me to Bunny Berrigan. He said, well, if you like Harry James, you're going to love Bunny Berrigan. And of course, his classic was I Can't Get Started. And my dad had that 78. So those are some of the early records I remember. And then he told me about Sing, 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 although he didn't have that record. So we went looking for it in the days of record stores. And this was before CDs, and so we found it was actually a 3 LP set, but they weren't together. You had to buy them separately. And I remember we found one volume, or maybe 2 of the 3 at the store, and that had Sing, Sing, Sing on it, and that drove me crazy with excitement as a kid. It was, such hot, fun music. And I remember we had to order the 3rd volume because I was, obsessed. I wanted to have the complete concert, so eventually got that as well. But those are some of the things that I remember from those earliest days. Oh, and also my friend Mike Carub bought me the Lewis Hot Fives LP as a Christmas present, I think when I was in 5th or 6th grade, and that was a exciting thing too. So we were kind of discovering all these jazz greats together, and we'd call each other up and say, "Hey, I got this record, Eddie Condon or Bix Beiderbecke, you got to come over and hear this guy," So it was fun to have a friend who shared my unusual interests.
So it might be a difficult question, but if you could pick your favorite all-time trumpeter, who would it be?
Actually, that is not a difficult question for me. It's putting the rest, the number 2 through 200 in some kind of order that would be difficult. But number one for me is Louis Armstrong.
And tell us a little bit about the impression that Louis Armstrong has made on you. What it is that you like about him so much.
Oh boy, I could go on for a long time on that subject, but I mean, I think early on, when I was a kid and first hearing him and hearing those records, there was the virtuosity that grabbed me, especially since I was listening to the Hot Fives as my introduction to him, really, while I was still in elementary school. And when you're a kid, you tend to be, especially impressed by virtuosity and fireworks and stuff like that. And pun intended, he did have a song called Fireworks, but so that was grabbing me. And then as I got to know his playing more and studied him deeper over the years, I appreciated the fact that he just had this wonderful, relaxed, swinging style, warmth in his playing and his singing that brings you into the recording, so you feel like you're there with him, kind of a very, very personal, warm approach that I really loved. And he really had a recognizable sound, and I grew to appreciate him and players like him where you can identify them in, 2 notes almost, just such a unique and personal sound. And then again later than that, I started to realize what his influence was and what a great influence he was. Trumpet players and all jazz musicians and even classical musicians, I think, to a degree. And I've read articles that agreed with this theory that his sound and vibrato and use of this kind of singing style through the horn apparently even influenced the way some orchestral and soloists and orchestral players played. So and of course he influenced singers like Billie Holiday, and so many of the great singers were influenced and inspired by him as their biggest influence. Ella Fitzgerald. So he's really, that's just, like I said, that's just touching the surface. But those are some of the things that come to mind that I love about him.
When you finished high school, was there any doubt about what you were going to pursue?
Not really. When I was in high school, I started playing gigs, as I said, kind of early in junior high. And in high school, I was, also keeping pretty busy. I already had some gigs. I was kind of worried that maybe, and this is while I was still in high school, I was concerned that it would be difficult to make a really good living as a musician, and wondered if that was a good idea or not, because a lot of the older professional musicians that I was playing with at the time had a day job or had something else aside from just playing that they did to help them to pay the bills and support their families and stuff like that. So it was a little bit, I was up in the air. For a while there, I thought I'd go to law school and be a lawyer, because I have an uncle who's a lawyer. And I thought, wow, he's a cool guy. And he's got a nice home and family and a Mercedes and a nice stereo system. I thought that might be the way to go. But he actually was one of the people that helped me to decide not to be a lawyer and not to go that route, but to be a musician, because he was kind of a frustrated musician himself. He plays the piano, but was never quite good enough, or didn't pursue it hard enough to become a professional musician. And he kind of was, he admired that I had that kind of talent, and that he wished he did. And he saw that I was good enough to pursue it, and make that my life's work. And it is really the only thing I ever really wanted to do. And so by the time I was out of high school, I realized that was it.
And you live in New York City, correct?
That's right.
What would you say jazz musicians in New York City's biggest challenge is?
Oh,
collectively.
Paying the rent. New York is becoming it's becoming a harder and harder place to be able to afford to live in it. I don't know if that's the kind of question or kind of angle you're looking at. That's one thing that comes to mind. It's difficult. A lot of the younger musicians are making it work by having roommates. They'll share apartments and stuff like that, because the rents are getting ridiculous here. Not that they ever were cheap, but there used to be more deals to be found if you're willing to live in a slightly less desirable neighborhood or less desirable building or something like that.
When you left Michigan, did you go to Chicago first?
No, I never lived in Chicago. I think a lot of people are understandably confused if they're looking at my bio or if they know of my history, because of the fact that I played with James DePogny's Chicago Jazz Band. That band, the name is a little misleading. It's not a Chicago-based band, although a couple of the players lived in Chicago. James DePogny is a piano player who's from the Chicago area, who's lived in Ann Arbor since probably 1960 or something like that in Michigan. And he put together this 8-piece band, plays Chicago jazz, Chicago-style jazz, and other things related to that, meaning like Eddie Condon and Frank Teschmacher and Wild Bill Davison and, that kind of style of jazz. And so I think a lot of people assume that I'm either from Chicago or live there, but I think that was the thing. So I moved from Hamtramck, Michigan to New York in 1989. Hamtramck is a city within the city of Detroit. And I was going to Wayne State University in Detroit before I moved out here. I was 25 years old, and I got a call from Vince Giordano asking if I'd want to come and play with his band for a week as an audition and to see whether it was something that I'd be interested in. Oddly enough, the same month, I had a call from the Dukes of Dixieland in New Orleans with the same kind of an offer. So within 1 month, I went and played a week in New York with Vince Giordano's Nighthawks and a week in New Orleans with the Dukes of Dixieland. And those happened to be my two favorite cities in the world that I had been to. And I was offered both gigs
Hmm.
I ended up picking the New York one, although I love New Orleans and I go down there at least once a year, and I have for 30 years or so.
Does it ever make you wonder what would have happened if you had chosen New Orleans instead?
Oh, sure, all the time. And it's kind of funny because a buddy of mine growing up, who's still a great friend of mine, named Duke Hiker, a trumpet player from Toledo, and I used to sub in his father's band, Ray Hiker and the Cakewalk and Jazz Band in Toledo, at a place called Tony Paco's. If you ever watched the TV show MASH, the character Klinger used to talk about being homesick for the hot dogs at Tony Paco's. But at any rate, I'm kind of going off into tangents here, but playing in Duke Hiker's dad's band, and then Duke eventually, he ended up moving to New Orleans, and he was called before me to move to New York to join the Nighthawks, but his dad kind of answered the phone and said, "Oh no, he's playing in my band and he's finishing up school. You should really call Jon Kelso. He's a better reader too." So, so we still joke about it today, where maybe I might have gone to New Orleans and Duke would have gone to New York, and what would that have been like? So what happened was we visit each other a lot. Like I said, I get down there once or twice a year down to New Orleans, and I get my fix and get to play some gigs and have kind of a working vacation. So I do wonder about it. It is kind of, I've always thought of it as sort of a backup plan.
Well, tell us about your recollections of meeting Vince Giordano, and what did you think of the band, the Nighthawks?
Oh, wow. Well, it was kind of a trial by fire the first time I played with the band. He had a concert in Pennsylvania. I can't remember what town now, and so that was the first time I met him and the first time I played with him. And I drove from Detroit, and I kind of underestimated how long it would take to get there. And it was in the days before GPS and, all these kinds of things that tell you how many minutes it'll take to get someplace and all that. And so I got there a little bit late. They had already started the sound check rehearsal in the afternoon. And I was kind of frenzied and whipping my horn out to get ready. And he was like going a mile a minute, and he was trying to just run through as many things as possible, as quick as possible. And the band sounded great, and he seemed super intense, which he is, but it was really like a whirlwind, because he'd be like, "Okay, let's," and the first song I think that he pulled out had a transcribed Louis Armstrong solo in it that I was sight reading, and all of the stuff I was sight reading because he didn't send me anything ahead of time to study or look at. And then like the next song had a Red Nichols transcribed solo to read, which is kind of a real gear shift there, change of style, and just all these different challenges thrown at me, and it was scary, and the band was just kind of plowing straight through the stuff, and they sounded great, and I was concerned with whether I was doing a good enough job or not, but it was moving so fast I didn't have too much time to worry about it, but it was definitely one of those sweat shooting out of your forehead kind of moments. But as I got to know Vince, I got to understand his dedication to the music, which I loved, and his drive and energy and knowledge of the music. He was a funny, nice guy who put me up for my first couple of weeks that I was there in his home while I was looking for an apartment, and we've been friends ever since.
And there's quite a number of artists that you've both performed with or recorded with. everyone from jazz legends like Dick Hyman to people like Linda Ronstadt, Leon Redbone, Levon Helm, Wynton Marsalis. There's a lot of them. I'm wondering, who have you shared a stage with or recorded with that you were the most in awe of?
That's tough. I've been very fortunate to have gotten to meet and play with a lot of my heroes. Maybe Ruby Braff, who I actually got to know and become friends with. He's a cornet player, one of the greats. And a friend of mine introduced me to him not too long after I moved to New York. He called me up and said he was going over to Ruby's apartment to hang out, and would I want to join him? I said, boy, would I? Yeah. So that was a lot of fun, and I started hanging out up at Ruby's place in Riverdale, New York, in the Bronx, and got to know him as a friend. And he'd say, bring your horn next time, and he'd sit down at the piano and say, hey, do you know this song? And we'd play together and listen to records, and he'd tell stories, and it was thrilling for me. Here's a guy who was close friends with Louis Armstrong and played with all these greats. It was the odd thing was he wasn't really playing around New York at the time, because he didn't really play little cheap gigs. He was big enough name that he would only do like concerts and festivals and recordings and things like that. So I still never heard him play live until he called me to play on a recording with him. So first time I actually heard him play live was standing next to him in a recording studio, like elbow to elbow with him. And that was a thrill and pretty scary too. But I'd say that was up there. The other one that would be a similar level of excitement was playing with Dizzy Gillespie.
Oh, wow.
And got to play with him twice back in Detroit with the J.C. Hurd Big Band. And J.C. and he were friends from way back, and J.C. was one of the great drummers. That was a thrilling thing, because the idea was they were going to celebrate their 72nd birthdays together in this concert, because their birthdays were right around the same time. And it was a kind of reuniting thing, because they had played together way back. And so Dizzy was bringing his big band arrangements to play with us, and that was a thrill. The bittersweet thing of it was that JC ended up passing away the night before the concert, which was a surprise to everybody, because he was in great shape and 72 years old and, playing wonderfully just a couple nights before that, just kind of whatever. He just had a heart attack, and that was it. We went ahead and did the concert anyway, and I was super impressed with how Dizzy handled it as the featured star, and see, whereas he was able to pay tribute to his old friend and acknowledge the sad part of losing J.C. Hurd, who was a Detroit hero and legend, but also, make people have a good time and smile and laugh and think of the good times and get back to being in the moment and making music and the healing power of music. So that was a really strong and, indelible memory, getting to play with him and to be in a big band where Dizzy is there rehearsing his compositions and his arrangements and giving you that insight into his music was invaluable and exciting and thrilling too.
I'm intrigued about your work with Leon Redbone.
Oh, okay, yeah.
How much of that is an act?
He's very much like the guy on stage, although it's exaggerated. It's an exaggerated version of himself. But he's an odd guy. I mean, even, I played with him for, touring around for 2 or 3 years And even off stage and away from the fans and public, he wears a hat and he wears sunglasses, and he's, curmudgeonly like his onstage character. It's just, yeah, it's kind of like he adopted this persona at some point during his life, and it's, and that's the way he is. He's an odd and funny and smart guy.
I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about the Irregulars.
Oh, sure. We recently celebrated our 10th anniversary as a band and as a residency on Sunday nights that we've had at the Ear Inn, which is in New York City, down on Spring Street in the Soho part of town. And a friend of mine, Matt Munisteri, a guitar player, and I had been playing there once a month with his group at this place, the Ear Inn, and at a certain point he suggested to the folks there at the Ear Inn that he and I, he wanted me to be the leader, but he was kind of instigating the whole thing, that we start up this Sunday regular gig, weekly gig. And it was kind of inspired out of the fact that this place, the Cajun, had closed. And that was sort of the last place in Manhattan that had traditional jazz every night at the time. Like, meaning, Dixieland, which is a word that many of us prefer not to use, but that's, to give people an idea of what style of music. Trad jazz, old time swing and New Orleans jazz. And so, since that place closed, Matt thought it would be a good time to start up a trad jazz, classic jazz gig like that once a week, because people were just wondering where to go, to hear that music. And so that's how we got started. And our concept was that it would be a quartet with guitar, trumpet, bass, and another horn. And that Matt and I would be the two regular Irregulars. And we spell it Earregulars. And that we would use different, various bass players and various other horn players to mix it up and to take advantage of, wonderful supply of great players and friends of ours in New York. And also just, if we have musician friends visiting from other parts of the country or other parts of the world, sometimes we'll put them on as the featured guest of the week. And so we always have great lineups, and it's been a great way for me to learn about which combinations of people just click and have a certain chemistry, and and developing those types of chemistry with different players. It's been a great way to do that, to have this weekly gig. And it's really caught on. We pack the place, and we have people from all over the world that come to hear us there that have heard about us or have heard us via CDs, or often there's a lot of videos on YouTube of us playing that Michael Steinman and some others have put up. So there's hundreds of those. And so, yeah, word got out, and it's kind of become a destination for people who like this kind of music.
And you said that there are people coming from all over the world sometimes, but I'm wondering if you've noticed any kind of commonality among people who like traditional jazz.
I'm not sure what you mean. What do they have in common, the people that like traditional jazz?
Yeah, did you notice anything in particular about something that people who like this style have in common?
They tend to be kind of sensitive people and artistic-minded people, and people who have an appreciation for history and interest in the history of culture in the United States, or the culture of the United States. I guess those are things that come to mind.
I think it was one of my first I guess you could say, in-depth exposures to traditional types of jazz was seeing the Eddie Davis Band. And
Oh,
yeah, and I was looking through, I went on a binge listening spree, and I listened to all of his albums a couple weeks ago, and you recorded with him, and I'm hoping you can just tell us a little bit about this man, Eddie Davis.
oh wow. He's wonderful. Yeah, he's a good friend and a wonderful player, and I've learned a lot from him over the years. For those who don't know, he spells it Eddy, Eddie. I'm very sensitive to spelling of names because every part of my name is begging to be misspelled. I'm so used to it, but it's just something that I try to be conscious of. Anyway, Eddie Davis. Yeah, I met him shortly after I moved to New York. Actually, Vince Giordano introduced me around to a lot of the band leaders and musicians in New York right when I moved to New York because he realized as much as his band was working, I would still want to have other gigs and meet and get to know other musicians in New York. So he was pretty cool about that. And I mentioned the Cajun a minute ago, and that's really where I got to play with Eddie an awful lot. And we were in this weekly band, Stanley Washboard Kings, that played Wednesdays there. And then Eddie had his own band on Tuesday nights for a while there. And at any rate, he was very supportive right off the bat. And in playing with that band, he wasn't exactly the musical director, literally, but kind of was. He would lead us towards certain songs, and he likes to sing. He's a great singer, and he kept the repertoire of that band interesting and varied, and would challenge us to add off the beaten path tunes to our repertoire, which I loved because it was one of the things that I was really enjoying about New York was that it gave me a reason to really dig deeper into traditional jazz as far as knowing the repertoire and the different styles. Because I was all of a sudden I was playing with some of my heroes and people that became heroes. So he's a real tunesmith. He knows a zillion tunes, and he makes an effort to really know the original chord changes, and he knows the words to every song, it seems like, and very enthusiastic and energetic, inspiring guy.
I don't ask musicians anymore what their favorite song is. But I would ask you this. Maybe tell us a song that when you see it's coming up in a set list, or somebody in a band that you're playing with calls it out, a song that you're especially excited by.
Well, that kind of changes week to week and month to month, and you get sometimes there are songs that are new to me or that I've finally gotten around to learning, or that sometimes that would bring out those kind of feelings for me. Songs that used to be difficult for me that I've figured out how to play them better, and also that now they're finally fun instead of not being so much fun. So there are songs like that. I guess, one classic that I love is Stardust. That just is a song that always grabs me, and I enjoy playing it, and I love hearing it. In recent years, a song that I really gotten to love to play is called Thanks a Million, and it's a little bit of an off the beaten path song, but Louis Armstrong kind of put it on the map, and that certainly fits into that category of songs that you're talking about, where just I look forward to playing it, and I feel a connection with it.
With all the things that you've done, is there any dream on the horizon, or any project, anything really, that you're looking forward to or you hope one day you'll get to?
There's a lot. I have some ideas that have been percolating for some recordings that I'd like to do. John Allred is a trombone player friend of mine who's, easily one of the best in the world. And he's one of our favorites for the Irregulars. And I haven't really recorded with him, like where it was just a small band featuring me and him. And that's kind of a goal. There's a young reed player here that moved here from Canada, Evan Arntzen, moved to New York not that many years ago, just in recent years. And he's now playing lead alto in the Nighthawks. He's a great clarinet player and tenor player. And he and I have formed a good rapport musically. And he's another one that I'm hoping to do an album with. We've been talking about that. So these are some of the things that come to mind that I've been thinking about and hoping to put into action.
What is the best thing about being Jon-Erik Kellso?
Oh, wow. Well, I happen to be lucky enough to be married to this wonderful woman named Jackie Kelso. That's right up there. That's a pretty great thing. Lucky guy. I'd say I feel very lucky and fortunate and happy that I've been able to always just do what I always dreamed of doing. I've never really had another job aside from playing music, and that's what I always aspired to do. And so that's a pretty great thing that I'm thankful about.
I'll end the interview with this question. Very open-ended.
Okay.
For anyone listening, we just don't know who we will reach or where anymore, given the current way communication works. So for anyone listening, what would you say to them?
Oh, wow. Well, I would like to see people introduce music to their children and children in their lives, whether they're a teacher or a parent or an uncle or whatever. I think we're lacking a way of teaching music appreciation as much as we used to. And I'd like to see kids grow up understanding and appreciating music a little bit more than they have been in recent times. Even schools, a lot of schools that used to have band programs don't anymore, and it's not just schools in poorer neighborhoods. I've played concerts in schools for rich kids and they didn't have a band. I thought that was strange. I'm thankful that I grew up in an area that had band in junior high and elementary school, high school, and all these kind of things, and also just vocal classes when I was in elementary school where it was just choir kind of thing, and I had teachers and parents and siblings that introduced me to all kinds of music and gave me an appreciation for all kinds of music. And I think, I'd like to see that kids are more exposed to jazz and any kind of good music, because they're just not necessarily getting exposed to it. And how can somebody grow up loving jazz if they don't even know what it is, or if the only thing they've heard is what they saw on, some talk show or something, or and I won't get mean and say names of people that I'm not as excited about, but you know what I mean. It's like,
I can only guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's, some people have a very limited knowledge of what jazz is, and it might not even be what you or I would consider to be jazz. So I think it's very important to kind of find ways to just introduce music into the lives of kids so that they're aware of it and they have an appreciation for it.
Well spoken.
Thank you.
Well,
one cup of coffee so far, so I was hoping I'd be, I'd be able to put together a sentence okay.
well, I want all the listeners to check out your website. It's kelsojazz.com, and that's Kelso with 2 L's, KELLSOJAZZ.com.
That's right.
And thank you very much for making the time to do this. Thank you for spending time with us.
Well, thank you so much for your patience. I know it took a while for us to get our schedules together, but I'm so glad that we were able to work it out. It's a delight talking with you, Paul. My
pleasure. All right, sir. Well, until next time.
All right. I hope to get together sometime and share a sandwich with you or something.
That'd be great. I need to get back to New York.
Yeah, please do.
All right, sir.
Well, I'm honored and delighted that you chose to include me in this series.
Oh, my pleasure to have you. Thank you.
All right. Be well.
You too.
The Paul Leslie Hour is hosted, produced, and written by Paul Leslie for Lifestyles Entertainment. For information, visit thepaulleslie.com. Thank you for being with us. Until next time.